I'm here to talk about some of the programs that are not on our main stage, although many of you listening know that we have fabulous, fabulous programs presented on our main stage, not only the national tours of Broadway shows that many of you come to enjoy and attend regularly, but also headline acts, musicals, performers, comedy. Once in a while we have comedy. And so we have a wonderful, wonderful lineup coming this season. And I just wanted to let you know one thing. If you've been looking and following our website, which is palacetheaterct.org, you know that our Broadway series subscriptions are on sale right now. And the lineup is spectacular for next year. I'm really like, wow, we have some of those shows you've all been saying, why isn't it at the Palace? Well, they're coming this year. Everything from, thank you, Natalie. She brought along, thank you, Hadestown, which debuts in October. And Hadestown is also right now on single ticket sale. So if being a subscriber isn't something that works for you or is in your wheelhouse, you can buy those single tickets now. But we also have things like The Cher Show, The Addams Family, Dear Evan Hansen. Oh my gosh, and one that I hope you'll all come and see because it actually kind of naturally segues into our topic this morning, and that is Come From Away. And if you haven't seen that show, do yourself a favor and make sure you see it. And I said there's kind of a natural segue about that show, which is talks about how people who were stranded on planes during 9/11, they had to land in Newfoundland. And the town of Newfoundland was inundated with all these people and like, what are we going to do? And what's going on here? And they're strangers to us. Well, it's the story of a beautiful welcoming, finally, and friendships that were made during what was a terrible time for so many people, all of us. And so you will be enriched by that show. It is a musical, believe it or not, but you will be so enriched by that show. So in studio this morning at your Palace, your place, I'm so fortunate to have several people. You might remember our last episode of the show I had on Susan Sir, who is one of the sponsors of our newly launched Immigrant Stories series. And so Susan and I talked, and we talked about that series, and we talked about her reasons for supporting it. But we also have some other sponsors, and one who is in the studio with me this morning is Jared Bruzis, the Chief Impact Officer for the United Way, right here in Waterbury. So welcome to the show, Your Palace, Your Place today, Jared.
Well, good morning. Thank you, and thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
We're excited.
And I want to introduce our other guests, and I'm going to get back to you as to why what I talked about earlier about Come From Away makes sense. That you're here this morning. I also have my wonderful colleagues at the Palace Theater. So Natalie Lawler, our Chief Development Officer.
Good morning, everyone.
I just gave you a whole new
You
title, didn't I?
Yeah. It's Development Officer.
And Peggy Terhune, who is Communications Manager.
That's right. Good morning.
Good morning. And so they're here because we're going to talk again about the launch of the Immigrant series, Immigrant Stories in Their Own Words, that launched this past Saturday with a presentation by a woman named Hosna Samadi, who's from Afghanistan. And the reason why I think it's a natural segue, as I was talking about Come From Away, Jared, the United Way has really taken a focus, especially in this last year. I think your theme that made so much sense for you to be involved as sponsors this year for this series. So can you explain that a little bit to our listeners, why you, and I keep jumping in, but I want to explain how you and I met, actually.
Sure.
So last June 19th, Juneteenth, the Palace Theater worked in collaboration with the NAACP of Greater Waterbury to present a program. And it was an impactful program. We had a wonderful Jeanette Scott, wonderful actor, local actor, who presented a piece about Harriet Tubman that was just so moving. So there were other elements to the program, but once we were doing Q&A with the audience, spontaneously I said, it is people's stories that really we need to hear. That's one illustration of a story that was so powerful. But now, in this day and age, we all have opinions, and we're all on, the spectrum of political discourse, if you will, and what our opinions are. We need to listen to one another and hear those stories. I said, maybe that's and I jokingly said to Frank Tavera, our CEO, maybe that's a new series. Well, afterward, Jared, I think at another event shortly after that, you came up to me and said, if you really want to do something like that, we want to talk to you about that, the United Way. So I am so thankful our paths crossed, because it's so significant. So talk to us a little bit about United Way and, the impetus for being involved based on your own theme, if you will, over
Sure.
the past year.
Yeah, thank you. So last year, and currently up until the end of the month here, we have our campaign theme of Help Every Voice Be Heard. And we at the United Way of Greater Waterbury really do believe that hearing the voices of folks in our community are really vital. So in that aspect, Sherry, we really see eye to eye with the palace of bringing voices to the table to help empower people, to help break down stereotypes and misconceptions, but also to look past what they might look like physically. So it's one thing to hear somebody, and it's another thing to see somebody. And sometimes when we just hear, it kind of helps erode some of those preconceived notions that we have with our eyes. So this year our focus was on ensuring that the voices of some of the most vulnerable in our community are heard. And many of those happen to be immigrants, but not all. And so we were able to go around and get stories from kids in our community, in schools, and our mindfulness programs, in the woods and encampments for people experiencing homelessness, families experiencing challenges with food, and all kinds of other different places and folks in our community that really make up who and what we are in Waterbury, the greater Waterbury area. And sharing those stories, pretty powerful and impactful.
No doubt. And I was talking to you and Natalie and Peggy earlier, and Glenn McCabe, who's here from your staff to kind of capture what's going on here, that it is through stories that we can understand what someone else is going through. And we may not always agree somewhere along the line. We might not always agree, but if we can start to learn again to have respectful listening opportunities, because I think we've gotten so away from that in the United States today. We've just moved away from just, you talk and I'm going to listen and I'm going to let you speak. I mean, that is what America is all about. We have a voice, and I love that, the United Way. And I saw that you were doing that same kind of work back, I would say quite a ways back now. You were moving more and more in that direction and recognizing that programmatically you were supporting programs, but there were some basic fundamental things people didn't have access to, or the resources for. I love that you started the financial literacy program. To me, that's the essence. You need to help people understand how money works and how to make it.
Or VITA. Yeah, so our volunteer income tax credit program, over $11 million in the last decade returned back to folks in our community.
Wow.
A really powerful, impactful way to ensure that folks continue to meet their basic needs and our work around food and homelessness. I'm fortunate to serve as an advisor to the governor on his interagency council on homelessness, and we're really helping as United Way of Greater Waterbury to drive conversations that really impact so many vulnerable consumers in our community, and again, among them, a growing immigrant population that have the same needs, wants, and desires as the rest of us. Just like my wife, who came here when she was 10 from Ecuador,
Okay.
right? So the same dreams that she and her family had when they came over from Ecuador to New York City is the same dreams and aspirations that we all have. But looking past some of the barriers and challenges and really listening to people, I think really makes a difference.
Absolutely, and you what you just said makes me naturally want to turn to Natalie Lawler and Peggy Terhune, my colleagues from the Palace, who actually attended, and I was so thankful for that, both of you, that you were there. Really appreciate that. But I think you got more than you bargained for when you attended. The speaker, Hosna Samadi from Afghanistan, she was phenomenal. She's only been in the United States since 2016. And I think both of you will attest to the fact that her presentation was so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And Jared, you just mentioned we all have the same aspirations. And what was driving her primarily was that she was a mother and her children, and she wanted to raise her children up to be in a different environment. Natalie, you were visibly shaken when the program ended. Can you talk a little bit about what you experienced?
Yeah, well, what you may be surprised by, Sherry, I didn't share this with you earlier, but I was actually introduced to Asana probably in 2017. I was at a celebration of Susan and Marina, and I was invited. And what is interesting about Susan Schur and Marina Viali is they are true community builders. So they support us at the theater, but what they do like to do is they like to connect people for reasons that they may have, but allow to happen organically. So I was seated right next to her family, Hosanna's family, and she did at that point did not speak very much English. I probably chatted a little more with her husband. And at that point in time, too, my husband was still in the military.
Okay.
So, and had been not for a long period of time, but did, drop into Afghanistan every now and then. Mm-hmm. So I think Saturday, seeing how she has embraced the United States, how the programs that she went through were so beneficial, how she is now out there as an advocate speaking on behalf of other women or just people in general. And then, in the back of my mind, the stories and the situations that I know my husband experienced that were not very pleasant. So I think at that point, it just really all hit me.
Wow, Natalie, and I did not know that. I did not know that you had met Hosna or her family. I love that you shared that just now. And one of the things about the speakers in this series, and there's a series of 3 other speakers scheduled for the coming year. The next young woman is from Kenya, and she's going to talk and tell her story. Nima Sialta is her name. She lives in Woodbury, and she was there, as were the other speakers who will be presenting. Salim Nijaim from Lebanon, who we all know in the Greater Waterbury and Connecticut community, is also slated. But one of the things I think that came across to me, it was powerful that host now was driven by being a mom and wanting the best in the welfare of her children. But she and her family took them 2 years to get ready. Oh, so while they were in Afghanistan, they had all the channels to go through to come here legally, I would say, as refugees. And they did the work, and it was not a pleasant 2 years. It was very unpleasant. But, I admire someone's bravery, and I ask myself, would I have the same wherewithal? I don't know. I really don't know. I would hope I would, but I don't know. And then they came here and did not speak a word of English. Peggy, talk a little bit about your reaction to her story. And Peggy, by the way, and she just met Jared for the first time this morning, Jared from United Way and Peggy from the Pales. Peggy actually wrote the grant that was submitted to the United Way to ask for their support of this idea, this program.
So her story was so compelling, not only what she and her husband were going through in trying to come here. And she did say one fact: every time somebody saw where they lived, somebody they recognized, they had to move because they might have been turned in.
Yes.
Because as her husband had been working with the U.S. government, and anyone who was seen to have cooperated with the U.S. government had a target on their back, and not being able to see family, not being able to see friends, and having to be in hiding. And you have small children. That's excruciating.
Of course, you know what I kept thinking back to is the Diary of Anne Frank, and the story of her story in being hidden by people who were humane and wanted to help them and wanted to keep them safe. Of course, in the case of Anne Frank, that didn't come to fruition, but we cannot imagine. We cannot imagine what that's like in this country. I mean, Jared, your wife is from another country, but and I don't know her circumstances. I'm just going to ask, was she persecuted? Did she come here under adverse conditions, her family, or not? And you don't have to answer that, but I know that most of us sitting in this room this morning, in this studio, don't know what that's like.
Right.
And to hear somebody, and you know what else struck me? And this is Hausna had such a command of the English language. Only having been here since 2016, her ability and her understanding of nuances, colloquial phrases, was amazing to me. Yeah. And the other thing, and I don't know if any of you want to speak to that, is she and her husband were educated. But when they came here, they were starting from ground zero. And
Right. Her husband isn't able to work in the field that I think she said he was a physician.
That's what I
and
thought.
he can't,
Yes.
He was driving Uber because he can't use his credentials that he, she said he was running a multi-million-dollar business with the U.S. government, and he had to start from scratch. They both did.
So think about that if you're listening. Think about, you went through medical school for, 8 years? You put whatever into, finances to support that. And then that's all stripped away. You're starting from nothing.
Right. And then she, had the advantage of already having had an education because her parents allowed her to be secretly educated when the Taliban wouldn't allow that. But she said a lot of the women she was working with in Afghanistan are pre-literate. They don't read, they don't write. So they're coming, many of them are coming here, and they have a language barrier, but they also have an education barrier.
Yes. Yeah.
So they're learning the fundamentals. And I think it's so important that groups like Iris that she works for and that help them are there. The United Way, a lot of groups around to help give that support that's so needed.
Yeah, to that point, I think we're pretty fortunate that the city of Waterbury, the greater Waterbury area, is really rich with many different resources to address some of those. And we, as United Way, are able to partner with many organizations to be able to help provide some of that safety net. We're also experiencing it in our own family. So My wife, a number of her family members are physicians, and one of them wants to come practice here in the U.S. So she's going through the process, although she's licensed and she's a full practitioner in Ecuador, but in order to come here, she's going through the exams to get board certified. And it's a huge, long process. It also took my wife several years to be able to come here with her family before they became citizens after the fact. But just to get here legally was a huge Herculean task for them. It took several years as well. But we in Waterbury really have a number of great supports and resources. To your point, a lot of folks that are coming that are immigrants that have great professions that are leaving those all behind and becoming the Uber drivers and working in minimum wage, low wage paying jobs and not having access to means or wealth, they do rely on a lot of the safety net that our community partners provide, whether it's behavioral health care at Wellmore or health care at Staywell or Malta House of Care, or we're fortunate we've got next week an eye clinic coming up that's free for folks that don't have insurance and things like that. So there's so many different supports and resources, the soup kitchens and food pantries and many different investments that we as United Way are able to make, coupled with many other organizations to really help provide that support so that folks can transition, including things like ESL. Right.
Yes.
So having a strong ESL network here in the greater Waterbury area is really vital. You're talking about her command of English in such a short time. Really fortunate to partner with Reba Spear here locally that's in the South End to provide folks really strong, competent ESL classes to really help them be fully engaged, involved, and be able to get those jobs that they need to go back and really earn for themselves again.
And have that power.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
language is power.
When you can't even communicate your basic needs, you have no power. And you have to just kind of accept what's happening to you. And I love that in Waterbury we have those resources because of organizations like the United Way. And Hosna, she is lives in the New Haven area, but Iris, and there's a whole network there. I don't want to go off on my tangents that I tend to do. So we're going to take a quick break and we're going to come back and finish up this conversation and again talk about a little bit more about United Way's role and also the role of the Palace Theater in presenting this series. So don't go away. We'll be back in 2 minutes.
eBay Motors.
Okay. Back to you. Yeah, sure.
And we're back with your Palace Place. We had a little glitch in the studio here.
Yes.
I'm Sherry Marcucci, and the Palace Theater presents this program twice a month to give you information that we hope is informative, educational perhaps. And if you've been listening, we're talking about our newly launched series called Immigrant Stories in Their Own Words. And it's a series that I hope if you're listening and you might be of a certain mindset, I hope that you will come to one of the upcoming presentations and allow yourself to just hear someone else's experience. And you don't have to agree with it, but listen and learn. I think more than anything, that's the impetus for this story. And while we were on break, we were talking to Jared Bruzis from the Greater Waterbury, United Way of Greater Waterbury, and my colleagues Peggy Terhune and Natalie Lawler from the Palace Theater, who both were present and heard our speaker last week. Jared, you were talking about some of the barriers, and we talked about ESL, and there's a wonderful network of resources available through the United Way. And then we want to talk a little bit with you, Peggy, about your experiences as an ESL teacher. So Jared, what are the resources? And if you're listening and you say this, maybe it doesn't apply to you, but maybe you know somebody you can share this information with.
Absolutely. So we're really fortunate in the state of Connecticut to have a really robust, comprehensive system with 211. And 211 is not just the place where folks can call, but they can also access resources through 211ct.org. And it really is the gateway or the conduit by which people are able to access all kinds of supports and services in our community, especially right here in Waterbury. But it's not just for English-speaking people or Spanish-speaking people only. but it's really a truly multilingual application that anybody can go to, regardless of what their language is, their tongue of origin is. They're able to go onto either their website or be able to call and get the supports and service they need in their language, which is really great.
So I'm not an English speaker. I call 211. What happens then? So I can...
So you'll go through select the prompt that's appropriate for you, or I personally like the 211ct.org. I think it's the fastest way to get resources because I'm not one that always likes to possibly, wait on a phone for a minute or two while the operator comes on, when I have all this information either on my smartphone or at the library or other different places for folks that don't have access to technology, just to be able to go on 211ct.org and have a huge wealth of information at your fingertips.
Now, I'm learning something right now. I do know about 211, but I did not know the breadth of the resources it could make one,
But not only does it have the resources, but it also helps us as providers identify, to track and trend what needs are. So every call, every click is a glimpse on what's needed here in Waterbury by zip code or by region or by the state. So we as United Way and other community partners also utilize all of that data to help us make informed decisions about our grant writing process or grant making processes, or what communities' needs are as well, and deploy assets to meet those needs. So 211 is probably one of the largest unsung heroes in our community, with well over 30,000 calls annually coming from Waterbury alone.
Wow, that's amazing. And again, new information I hadn't known about.
It's a great gift to our city.
Yeah, and that's through the United Way Network.
Correct.
In
United Way
Connecticut.
Connecticut. Yep, United Way Connecticut Network, absolutely.
That's wonderful. So when you support United Way, you're helping to support that resource.
Correct.
That's fabulous. And, all of our communities are changing. The demographics are fluid and, rapidly changing. And we have to, adapt and embrace that so we can be communities that not only provide, but thrive. And I think that's the key word. If you don't give people or help them, that was the thing Hostess said. And I love that. We all know this phrase. Mm-hmm. She spoke it. She said, I really believe that we need to teach people to fish. And of course we do. I mean, that's just logical. We need to help our fellow man. We need to not bring them along and coddle people, but to say, here's tools, and I'll support you as you learn how to use those tools. That's so critical. Mm-hmm. Peggy, you know that because you taught English as a second language, or ESL.
I did. I taught I was an ESL tutor in a neighboring school district for about 8 years. And from kindergarten through high school, I just bopped around between the schools and worked with a variety of students from a variety of backgrounds.
And what made you decide to do that?
I kind of fell into it. I'm bilingual. I'm fluent in French, so I kind of understand what it's like to be in a school system where you don't necessarily know the language right away. And if you think about a child, whether they have just immigrated here or even if they were born here but their family language at home is a different language, and you're dropped into a classroom, everyone else knows what the social norms are, everyone else knows the language, and if you are, especially if you're newly arrived, it's a foreign world and it's very overwhelming, and you have a lot of these kids just kind of retreat into themselves sometimes.
I'm glad you brought that up because actually one of our presenters during this series is a young man who's in his early 30s now. He was not from a foreign country. His parents were. Dominican Republic, just so happens. And I just came back from there, but that's not why I picked him. But his mother would not allow him to speak English at home. So, as a child, as you just said, what is the thing a child wants more than anything in school in particular? It's to fit in. And he didn't fit in. So he's going to share his experience as a child of an immigrant, what that was like growing up, which I think is an interesting perspective to bring to this series and how he adapted and, that story. So thank you for making me.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think one thing Hostess said was, she was learning English alongside her children.
Yes.
They were watching cartoons or they were in preschool.
Dr. Seuss books.
Right, Dr.
Yeah.
Seuss books. So she was learning at the same time as them. Yeah. And if you think about a lot of what's assigned in schools, it's go home and read for 15 minutes to your parents. Well, I know that all my students went and diligently read with their parents, but the parents weren't native speakers, so they weren't able to tell the children if they were reading correctly or explain what the words meant or help with other kinds of homework. So there are a lot of extra challenges that come with that. Yeah. Kids are doing their homework, they're behaving in school, but it's still sometimes running into social cultural differences that they don't understand. Yeah. So it was a lot of navigating, not just, it's kind of the whole child, not just the academic world, but just helping them fit in, helping them understand. But also I would always tell the kids, you have this amazing gift because you have a second language.
Absolutely.
And you have another culture and you should celebrate that.
Absolutely. And so that's the thing, even we all have the experience or story of our own parents or our grandparents, and things are different today though, and the challenges in childhood are different, but we don't want to take away someone's cultural norms or the things, as you said, Peggy, it's beautifully put, to celebrate. We want to enhance their ability to succeed in this country. So, I think I love that people like you, Peggy, and Natalie, and Jared, certainly in the United Way, you and Susan Sir and Marina Viali, and Tim and Mary Ellen Rourke, who are also supporting this program, and the Rourke Insurance Agency. We're talking about helping people be all they're meant to be. And I said this before on this program, my own personal belief is that we came into this world to serve one another, to help lift each other up in ways that make the whole better, not take away from it. So I thank you all for talking about this morning, and we're going to take a quick break and come back. But Natalie is going to stick around because we're going to talk about a whole other topic. Jared, a few last words you'd like to say on behalf of United Way.
So United Way is really proud of the work that we've been able to do to advance the stories of some of the most vulnerable in our community. We're definitely proud to partner with the Palace Theater and bring these immigrant stories to life and sharing their voices as well. And so really honored and grateful for the commitment of the Palace, and know that we are steadfast in our work to ensure that folks have the resources and support they need to really thrive here in the greater Waterbury area.
Thank you. And, the Palace is honored to bring these types of programs because as a community, a stakeholder in this community, the Palace as an entity, it's our commitment to the whole community. And we have an obligation and a responsibility in that role. So thank you for helping us make that come to life. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to be back with Natalie Lawler, and we're going to talk about having a good time. Okay, that's quite a segue from our current topic, but we will do that, so stick around.